If you actually engage your MBWA and you ask people, why are you doing that? What did you expect? All those things, you're going to get a different set of answers that helps you build not just a thing or a what, but you're going to build the response to Simon Sinek's concept of why. You're going to be a why company. And you want a website to answer the why for you, which is the emotional piece. And you're just not going to get that from someone who doesn't engage their MBWA and ask the 5 whys.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. While building your e-commerce site, you might be tempted to go for the cheapest option. But for your e-commerce initiatives to work, you need to perform a deeper analysis of your customer journeys to provide them the experience they expect. This study requires you to go deeper than 5 whys and to utilize methods such as management by walking around, also optimizing customer journeys in an ongoing process, which does not end with identification. In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss customer journey mapping. We covered many grounds in this episode, including how companies can start on the customer journey and why performing as is and to be analysis is vital to identify customer journeys and behaviors. Finally, we discussed several other concepts related to customer journeys, such as touch points, cohort analysis, the importance of user research, and design thinking. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello everyone, welcome to today's show, and today we have a very exciting topic. It's customer journeys, which is going to be the follow-up topic from the last week, and today we are going to build on top of that, and we are going to explore how the customer journeys are going to look for each of the persona. So we are going to start with the intros first. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Steve Rice. I'm the president of .com Jungle, and we're a technology and marketing company that helps businesses make and implement wise technology choices, which can be from websites to integrations with HubSpot to integrations with ERPs. And I'm super pleased that you've allowed me to be on your webcast here. So thank you.
Yeah, and your experience is going to be super relevant because the journey does not end inside e-commerce platform. It's much broader. In my experience, it's going to have much broader touch points. So thank you so much for being here, Steve.
My pleasure.
Lucas, can I move to you next for your introduction if you don't mind?
No, not at all. I don't know who we go to next, but absolutely. I'm Lucas Walker. I've done a tour of a number of e-commerce software companies, Shopify, Gorgeous, work with OmniSend on their podcast. I also had a CPG company myself in terms of Treats Happen Natural Dog Treat Company. So that's where a lot of my biases and philosophies come from. But if you make it in CPG, it's pretty competitive. So I take a lot of those strategies to easier niches and industries, I suppose is the way to do it. And now I've got my podcast network that I'm the president, producer, and wear all kinds of hats there as you do when you start another company.
Okay, amazing. And we always like to have the podcast host just because the kind of experience they are going to bring talking to different speakers, it's going to be so much relevant for our audience. By the way, from your biases, the bias that you mentioned, I think we like to have that bias because our audience is really the CPG, the manufacturers, the e-commerce companies. So they would definitely like to hear your stories. So we are going to start with you, Steve. So let's say if any company wants to start on the customer journey mapping, the exercise of customer journey mapping, they probably don't understand how many different customer groups they have and why do they need to map the customer journey, why it is going to be relevant. For example, let's say if I have a company that is probably moving to e-commerce now, right? So in the traditional world, probably you don't need to worry about the journey. But if you are moving to digital commerce or the e-commerce, I think the developers are going to ask, okay, what is your journey? So let's say if you were to coach this company or the person, the importance of customer journey mapping, what would be your thought process?
Well, first of all, I think I would, coming also from the CPG space and the manufacturing space, there's no way you can do your job without doing a CVJ, the customer value journey mapping. And there are a lot of samples out there that you can download. But the approach I think that I would take is the same that you would take if someone was looking at you to set up an ERP or some other system, because it really is a system. You have to decide or figure out what the as is state is. And then you need to figure out what the to be state is. And those aren't easy. And especially if you're a manufacturer who has been selling wholesale and is deciding to go direct to consumer, those consumers are very different than the people you've been selling to. And in fact, I have a great example of a client who was basically in the medical product goods manufacturing industry, great company, high-end products, but their market initially was very, I'm going to use the word antiseptic because it's from the medical field. They were selling to doctors and hospitals, and their website was antiseptic in a very good way. It spoke to the administrators and doctors who were buying their products and reselling to consumers. But when they went to go direct to consumer, their entire brand was off. So the understanding what the value journey is of an administrator buyer from a hospital is very different from understanding a consumer, in this case, who maybe sprained their ankle. So you have to have a different journey for those people, and you need to speak to them differently.
Okay, amazing. So I am actually going to have some follow-up questions there. So interesting points that, you know what, you need to do the as is and to be, which is great. But typically when you look at the mapping for an ERP versus mapping for a customer facing platform, it's going to be slightly more involved because people in the ERP world don't like to think their internal stakeholders as their customers. I wish they did, but they typically don't. So let's say if you want to coach them, okay, what is as is, what is to be, how would you describe it to a manufacturing executive and why that is going to be relevant?
Well, I think that first of all, we would want to omit the idea of the platform from the journey first. Yeah. We don't want to map our customers' experience to the tools that we have. We want to know what the customer is experiencing already. And frankly, sometimes they're not going to be experiencing some very good things. And we want to identify those challenges and fix them. So you really want to do it platform independent. Did I answer your question? I feel like there was a piece at the end I forgot.
The as is and to be, let's say if you were to call, so the platform, you definitely want to, take it out because that's going to be slightly more tool discussion. But let's say if somebody does not know what as is and what to be is and what are different moving parts going to be there, what all do they need to consider to go from as is, which is going to be no documentation, to be, which is
right.
So how do they go there?
Well, I guess let me use the medical company as an example. The as is state was that they knew that there are people out there who got injured and that they had devices for them. And they weren't actually sure what journey someone would take from spraining their ankle to finding them to being appreciative enough of what they were going to offer and knowing there was value to purchasing. They knew they made the best product in the industry. And they were confident that if someone was concerned about a high quality product for their injury, that they'd have a high chance of selling it. But they didn't really know what people were experiencing. They didn't even know what people were typing in to even get to their website. So sometimes, and with a company like that, what you might actually do is start at, well, what do you want it to look like, right? Because it's not just about selling them a product and saying goodbye. Although I may have picked a fairly, maybe not a good example because it's not like somebody who sprains their ankle is going to do it over and over again and come back multiple times to buy an ankle brace. So a better example might be maybe somebody who sells disc sanders. The experience of someone who uses a disc sander, we all know that eventually that sanding pad wears out and they're going to need new ones. And so if you create, their journey, sooner or later their journey is that they're going to get in a car or get online and they're going to search for a replacement. Well, at least you can guess. I guess there's folks out there who are going to use a disc sander forever and wear it out. I don't know. But if you don't know what your to-be is, it's possible to really just start at, well, what do you want it to be? What would you want if you were a consumer and you wanted to get the best advice?
Yeah. Yeah, so from my experience, I guess obviously to be is going to be the ideal state. If you can document, you can pull it off. In my experience, even defining as is super critical. I mean, 40% of the needs or the requirements or the business that you are doing, you are probably not going to know that because, everybody you are going to ask inside the company, they are going to say that, what, I probably don't know. So 40% of the requirements in our experience are sort of unknown. It just works inside the business in our experience. So defining even the as is extremely difficult. So now I'm actually going to move to you, Lucas. What is your experience overall? Let's say if somebody is starting on the customer journey and they have never done this before. Okay, so how would you approach this? Let's say if you are hired as a coach.
So let's just assume that you're existing, you have customers already, not going from 0 to 1, but 1 up and scaling. And I don't want to restate anything too much because Stevie did such a great job really explaining everything, but I can't stress enough that as is state or what's going on now.
Yeah.
And take a look at your customers and really who is your ideal customer. And I think for every company, it's cheap to acquire, if not free. So maybe a referral customer. They stay a long time, so high LTV.
Yeah.
And they don't cost a lot of maintenance in terms of support or replacement. So you're not spending a lot to constantly send them out replacements, or after every order they harass your sales team. So start by taking that bucket. And if you have a group of these customers, even if it's only 20 or so, really reach out to them personally. And as you have more and identify more, then add in some layers of automation, but find out where did they come from? Is there one specific place? Is there a forum that's really strong? Is it community driven? Is it customer referral driven? Are Facebook ads just great? Are they organic from your social content? And then you know where to invest more of your marketing budget. Do they see you in a retail store and then come online? So the actual value of a retailer 1.5x your revenue that you're getting from them versus how you're typing it in. So really go through that process of knowing where your best customers are coming from, because at the end of the day, at the bottom of your P&L, that's what can cause all those leaks. And with operational costs just going up and up and up, it's so critical to make sure you're bringing on not just customers that are cheap to acquire, but also customers who are cheap to maintain and aren't causing big headaches. So I think that's my biggest takeaway there. And from there, continue to go down using the methodology of your choice to find what do those customers like. Do they listen to podcasts? Should you get into podcast advertising? Are they very visual? And maybe YouTube or TikTok is where it's at. Should you be offering something like phone support if your ideal customer is a little bit older? That will actually increase your conversion rate down the road. And that's really getting to where that second state, I can't remember, it was the to be state of where you want your customers to be. So maybe it's reducing your support strain per customer. Maybe it's reducing your cost to acquire a customer because those customers tend to be better anyway. So just really knowing what your customers want and who they are. And that's going beyond just sort of the job title or whatever, but really knowing who they are. Do they drive or do they take transit? What makes them unique? And you'll probably find a few more similarities than you think. It could be even certain regions that are just kind of dead zones for you. So then you can readjust your advertising spending and not spend as much in those areas.
Okay, so some very interesting comments there, and I completely agree with you there that ICP is definitely going to be your starting point. If your ICP exercise is not really going to be aligned, then most likely your journeys are not going to be aligned as well. So that's definitely a foundation. So you also spoke about the groups a bit. Now, let's say if I ask you a question related to these groups. So one way to identify these groups could be, let's say if we are simply thinking based on my ICP and I have defined my groups based on that. But there is a little bit of notion of channels as well, that the channels need to be mapped on each of the ICP to be able to define the customer journey. So let's say if you were reviewing, let's say either the marketing plan or the customer journey or a website, and you need to sort of tell them whether their ICP and customer journeys are mapped appropriately or not, and you are reviewing that. So, do you have any examples by any chance that you might be able to share of defining these groups in the right manner versus not so right?
But really start with your customer data
Yeah.
and really start with what is your threshold for a great customer. Maybe it's between that second and third order. So
Yeah.
then you can start to just kind of chisel away at it like from a block of stone. So now we're going to filter out customers who have ordered 2 or less times or 3 or more times. Well, what about customers who order twice and one of their orders is huge? Maybe we want to see like they could also be good to move forward. Or customers who order 3 times or more, but their every order is tiny and it costs us more in shipping.
Yeah.
Maybe we want to exclude them. And eventually, if you keep breaking it and just chiseling away, you get left with a list of customers that you can see how they came for the first time. Did they click emails? Was it an automated email or was it a campaign? And I use email because email just drives so much revenue. But it could be that once a quarter, you should run a customer re-engagement campaign on Facebook and then start to create some lookalike audiences from those. So I think it really goes into that you have because you can be so flexible with it and it tells you so much.
Okay, amazing. So, Steve, I'm actually going to move to you next. So, let's say if somebody does not know what the touch points are, and in my mind, when we are designing the customer journeys, I think touch points are going to be super critical, as channels are, as the exact paths are going to be, as the entry points are going to be. In my mind, these are the basic components of designing your customer journeys. So, let's say if I ask you, okay, what are touch points? Why they are important, how many different touch points that anybody needs to consider when it comes to customer journeys. Do they always need to be just the digital, or should they cover physical touch points as well?
Okay. So one of the ways to explain this is that the whole idea of a customer value journey or any customer journey came about because we were all in business thinking about funnels. Your conversion funnel was the big thing, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember when CVJs or customer value journeys really took hold. But we all, of course, recognize that essentially when you start thinking about lifetime value or LTV, as Lucas mentioned earlier, that has a lot more to do with keeping the customer that you already have and selling them more things later than it does finding new customers. In fact, it solely has to do with that. It's the correct sentence. And so the customer value journey is a response to the mapping, the as-is state that everybody did that made us recognize, well, wait a second. It's not just about the funnel. We're not just here to funnel people in here to buy something. We want to create a brand. We want people to actually like us, so to speak, and they're gonna show they like us by coming back and buying more. So the whole journey doesn't stop when they buy something. It includes what happens afterwards. One of the sentences that the least expensive customer to buy is the one that you already have, which Lucas said that in a different way earlier. So as far as the touch points, you will find maps. You can look up a value journey worksheet online, and you'll find touch points that talk about awareness, broad strokes: awareness, strengthening brand image, increasing engagement. But oftentimes they're the ones that you'll find most common, I think, are written from the perspective of a marketing person, and they're really talking about business objectives. The ones that I think are most powerful are ones that are actually talking about the customer's experience. And you need to have both. But we need to recognize that when someone says, raising awareness to the customer, that just means that you're becoming known to them. When you talk about strengthening brand image, it means that you're actually becoming interesting. And if you're going to increase engagement, it's because you're becoming unique, right? And if you actually increase website traffic, it's because you're becoming relevant to them from their perspective. So if I'm going to answer the question about touch points, we can talk about physical mail and mailings like you mentioned, and or billboards and things like that. Those all have a place in this if you're big enough to afford them. Most smaller companies aren't going to be able to afford those. So your touch points are going to be the places where your customers hang out and the website that you have for them to touch. And really, you need to be thinking about where they are already. In a certain way, your websites might be the least important part of your branding, because your customers are already out there somewhere, right? Yeah. Chevrolet knows that their customers sitting in the ballpark right now watching the Blue Jays and the Angels play, right? So they're not trying to get them to come to their dealership today. So you have to think about the customer experience and where they are. And if you're selling rock climbing equipment, you need to be in the places where rock climbers are already hanging out, both digitally and physically. So,
hey Steve, did you mention that because I'm a huge Jays fan? Or was that just a reference?
Well, if you are a Jays fan, I'm an Angels fan, and you've got Vladdy Guerrero, and you beat us yesterday. So good job.
Poor Steve, because we have two Jays fans here in the
room. You also have literally the most exciting player since Babe Ruth.
Yes.
We're watching history.
Maybe since before Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
We have the most exciting player since Babe Ruth, named Mike Trout, and then we have this other guy.
That's true.
Okay, so Lucas, I'm actually going to move to you next. So let's say if you were considering these touch points and going back to Jay's example, so let's say the way Steve really described the touch points being the holistic picture, because they influence the behavior when your buyers are actually going to come to your site. So would you actually consider these J's billboard as part of the customer journey when you are mapping them out? Or would you completely ignore them and then focus completely on the website? What is your experience when it comes to touch points?
Yeah, I think it's something to monitor.
Okay.
Because when you do some out-of-home campaigns, you need to track something. Is there a lift of sales in an area where you do it? And in that case, it's absolutely a touch point. And the reasoning for it could be that it builds credibility with your customers. It could drive, so I'm trying to stay in frame here, it could drive direct sales. It could just drive awareness that then you see down the road, maybe 6 weeks, 12 months down the road. So I think it has to be monitored if you're doing it, but it's not necessarily the most essential touch points, because it's not necessarily touching everyone. You can't say with 100% certainty that it's happening. So I'd almost add it in as a footnote during your mapping process. And then once you know that it does work, then start to add it in and get into those 201 and 301 strategies of cohort analysis, measuring the really data science, maybe layering on some third-party data as well.
Lucas, so let's say if people don't know what cohort analysis is, and if you want to explain it to them, how would you explain what exactly it is and how do you perform that?
So just breaking it down into a timely group. If you look at a 2-week period of time, what were your promotions that you were running then? And what happened to those customers in the coming weeks? How many of them did come back to reorder at least one time? So looking at a specific set of customers and what was going on with them during that time.
Okay, very interesting comments there. Steve, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I have a great story that I think will really help explain what cohort analysis is and how it can actually be used. Because and I want everybody to just think about Jeff Bezos right here, because when he started at Amazon, he really was thinking about selling vacuum cleaners. I don't really know. I didn't pay that much attention, but I do remember that when he was just looking at selling books, he was thinking that the lifetime value of his customer was $2,000 over in he picked a time of 5 years. can't just say the the average lifetime of an American at 72.3 or whatever it is. That's not what it's about. So usually people pick about 5 years. So the idea of having lifetime value is so that you can actually base your marketing spend and take a loss at the beginning of your relationship with the customer if you're going to provide them value and they're going to come back and spend more. That's all Bezos was doing and losing money for so many years. Now, in order for you to measure what's really happening so that you can find out if your theory of lifetime value is correct, you have to have a cohort. We once worked with a company that actually supplies the majority of the audiobooks to Amazon, was it Audible, right? Great company. And it was our job to help them go digital and basically compete with Audible with their own brand. And you needed to know what the lifetime value was of their customers so you could measure not just what your marketing did to get somebody in, but what it did to keep them there. So for instance, we started with monthly cohorts, and we were doing a lot of paid advertising. And so we could know exactly how many people we drove to the website, exactly how many people converted and bought a book, an audiobook. But then we also could keep track of, say, January, I'll go back to 2010, and know how much those people spent in February 2010 and how much they spent in March, April, May, June, July. And what we learned is that, you get this precipitative drop off, but some percentage, say 3% of all those people bought a subscription and were still spending money 18 months later on that subscription, which was like $17 a month. It doesn't seem like a lot if you're, starting out with 30 people. But when you start ramping up and getting more and more customers, now you're looking at this exponential revenue maker that you can base your ad buy on. And from a financial standpoint, you can ask, what's my return on investment? So what we learned essentially is that, first, we were able to drop their cost per acquisition from $128 to $22 almost overnight with a better program. And their return on investment, meaning the point where they actually made a penny off of their paid advertising, it went from, almost a year and a half to 56 days. And we knew that because of the cohort analysis. So that's the answer to why is cohort analysis important. And it's also part of the answer to why you should be thinking about lifetime value, unless you just sell a throwaway thing. You don't expect somebody to come back.
That's a very interesting story. So I guess, we are getting into a little bit of different methods in terms of what you can use to identify your customer journeys. And there are so many different methods, and there are a lot of opinions in my experience in the community. Some people like to do surveys, some people don't like, some people just hate surveys. Some people like to spend money in paid advertising to be able to do their analysis, to be able to understand what is really happening in those journeys. So Lucas, let's say if I move to you, what are your favorite methods, and in your experience, what has really worked and what has not worked that you would not use? Or if you have any specific situations or these specific customer types for which you really like to utilize certain methods versus the other.
Yeah, I think that let's start with what I don't like. And that's just ripping things up and making drastic changes and changing a bunch of things. Then you don't know what worked. Then it just worked because it was new and novel. So I really like taking a scientific approach of changing or testing one thing at a time. So I'm a big fan of the scientific method. Now, in terms of design thinking, mapping some of the customer journeys or UX studies, I think it's important to stay on top of what's most up to date versus looking at stuff that may have worked a long time ago, and also knowing how that ties back into your brand, because no matter what you want to do, you can find a study or something that will prove it right. You can hear that you need a great, beautiful mobile website or that you need an ugly desktop website, and both can be revenue generating and convert at the same rate and have loyal customers. But it's knowing, and I keep bringing it back to ICP because that influences so much of what you'll do. And then once you start, you have a few more concrete data points, then you can start layering it on of, should we be mobile first or desktop first? How do those different experiences impact our customers? Do they first find us at the top of the funnel on mobile and then go to desktop to complete their purchase? Is that because it's too hard to order on mobile, or just because they don't like buying on their phone? So I think really starting with a scientific methodology to measure and then adjust changes as you test, and really understanding your ideal customer profile and how they buy, knowing how they experience your brand, especially in the most measurable ways that you can.
Okay, some amazing insights there. So, Steve, I'm actually going to come back to you. And since you mentioned the story last time, I'm hoping that you are going to have another story when it comes to describing design thinking, because that's another term that our customer base or the listener base might not be familiar with. But before we do that, especially in the manufacturing space or in the industrial space, and when you talk about this whole mobile driven experience or desktop driven experience, and these guys are thinking, I don't even have all of that. Okay, the only thing I really have is my customers are really calling me, and my customers very rarely come to the website. So let's say if they are not familiar with, why they should be worried about mobile, and I don't even know if the space that you work in, are they really worried about, customers coming from mobile or not?
Well, certainly some of them are.
Okay.
And what you actually just touched on was the theory of constraints by Goldratt,
Yeah.
which in a sense, I've already sort of stepped outside of the conversation about customer value journey and talked about things like why it's important. And in a certain way, this is too, but it's also stepping outside, because one of the things you said is I just have a bunch of customers who are calling me. I don't know if the website's important. Well, in my experience, if you're running a company of any size and you have a lot of people calling you, it's probably because your website isn't very good. And certainly there's so many technological blocks in so many industries right now that are unintentional but intentionally made, that it kind of drives me nuts. And I think I gave an example of this before, where I was talked to a sales rep in the especially outdoor retail world who reps really big and great companies that sell things like this, and water bladders and dry bags for kayaks. And this is an entire industry where we all know how to use computers. We know how to place an order. And they're going to trade shows and handing people pieces of paper. And when I called the sales rep, his customers are the dealers that his clients sell to, right? I said, what are you doing this weekend? Because I'm going to be in town. He said, I am placing orders. I'm hand entering them myself, and I'm going to be doing it for the next 12 days. I won't be able to see you at all. And I was just blown away by this. So that it's an example of they don't have the right digital technology in place. They're not doing it on any website, whether it's a third-party SaaS or their own. And they're not only are they kind of screwing their customers, they're screwing their salespeople. Like we're talking probably for that one industry, all of this there's probably 30 sales reps who are spending 7 to 10 days twice a year doing that. That's a lot of human capital that would be better spent actually servicing the dealers and training the salespeople on the sales floor, that would actually increase sales, would increase credibility of their own brand in the stores. And you just can't be doing that. So if you're thinking about customer value journey and you're a manufacturer, your dealers have a value journey too, and they have an experience. And once again, if you're getting a lot of phone calls, I'll bet anybody here, maybe we all do websites or something, but you can fix something. And I've done it 100 times in the last 10 years or more. And it's just so obvious. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you definitely are. So, in fact, I'm actually going to move to Lucas next. And Lucas, so when we think of this whole user experience design thinking, and I am actually going to share a story from my experience. Typically, when we look at the manufacturers or the distributors, they are always thinking, especially if they did not have, let's say, any sort of mobile experience or the website experience, for them, this whole digital thing is very new, because they have never acquired customers from any of these channels in their life. So for them, things like design thinking, things like user experience is always very hard to digest. So they are always thinking that, I have a developer here, and if I want to ask them to create a website, this guy is actually charging me $400 to create a website. And now you are trying to explain to them that you need to be worrying about ICT, you need to worry about your user experience, you need to worry about customer journeys, you need to worry about design thinking. So why is all of this important? Let's say if you are trying to create a website for the first time, I can simply hire my $400 guy and I can create this website. So why am I spending so much time in analyzing these things and optimizing the journey?
Yeah, and that's a great way to phrase it. And I love taking a little bit more of, say, a wholesale or B2B approach versus direct to consumer. And I think that one of the big points of that is how competitive is your market? Do you have a total monopoly on it if you're the only supplier of this, say, a thermal bladder for the mug that keeps your drink really hot? If you're the only game in town, sure, go with the $400 guy. It'll catch up eventually. But what is it like to order from your competition? And I think that's where things catch up. And especially in more of the direct consumer space, who is your competition? Well, it's Amazon. What's it like ordering from Amazon? Are you asking for a ton of data before your customers can even buy?
Yeah.
Or do you make it really easy to add to cart? I also think that emotion is something that's very, very important. Is this a well thought out purchase, or is it a quick little impulse buy? If it's a quick little impulse buy, make it as frictionless as possible. If it's a large multi-touch kind of sale, like say a Harley Davidson motorcycle, then you need to really account for that in how you sell through your customer journey. And Harley Davidson doesn't start when you're 16 and you get your license, or when you turn 40 and you hit your midlife crisis. Their marketing starts to kids by making Harley Davidson branded toys and bicycles. And the reason for that is that they believe that the best way to see the greatest country in the world is on two wheels, and they want everyone to be able to experience that. And that just comes from knowing how your customers' emotions as they go through the entire customer life cycle. Now, to play devil's advocate, Yamaha and Suzuki and Honda and just about every other brand, it makes a lot of money selling motorcycles because they know the pain points of Harley Davidson owners, that they require a ton of maintenance. So you can hit different aspects selling the same product, and just knowing those nuances.
Okay, so amazing story there. So Steve, I'm actually going to move to you. So let's say if you were looking at a website that was done by the $400 guy, and you can tell by looking at it, I can almost guarantee that all of these things which are really going to be good from the customer journey perspective, from the user experience perspective, that is all missed. I mean, you simply put something there, and then you are probably going to think that nobody is really coming to the website. Nobody is coming because you need to really map and you need to really align these journeys, and it's an ongoing process, in my opinion. So let's say if you were to debug and optimize the journey, do you have any stories that you might be able to share from your past when you looked at $400 website? You sort of knew that, oh my goodness, this is going to require so much work. And can you talk about the specifics of that story, how the website was, what were the problems, why this whole journey was sort of missing from the website, and what you had to do to actually optimize it? Do you have any stories that you might be able to share?
I do. First, kudos to Lucas for the great example of a baby customer journey for Harley Davidson.
Yep.
It's so right on point. And we don't all have brands big enough that we can do that, but someday maybe we will. It'll be cool enough. As far as, the websites, I am a big fan of concept of human-centered design that came out of the D School in Stanford. And I think that's, what we're talking about. And the sad thing about the $400 website is we're really talking about also like $20,000 and $40,000 websites that weren't built correctly.
Yep.
And I think the challenge is that a lot of people who ask for websites and a lot of people who build websites, they're building things, right? I'm asking for a website. I don't really know. I know I have customers. I know that they need to buy stuff online. And so I'm just going to go get a WordPress website or Shopify or BigCommerce, I work in all of those, so I don't mean to sound like, oh, I'm just going to go do that. But you can just go there and end up with just a website because you haven't actually thought about your own users. So if we're talking about customer value journey, let's use as an example a company that makes and distributes and buys and distributes food products. So like, let's say they make sausage, they make pizzas, but they also buy big cans of tomatoes and they deliver them to restaurants and grocery stores and markets and bakeries and whatnot. So this is actually a real world example. When you're building, you could throw a website together and just say, yeah, there's a place for people to buy stuff. And in Shopify and WooCommerce and everybody else, you can click a button in the back and you can create a wholesale user group, and you've created that thing, and you can say, well, these wholesale people get this price. And so someone's built you a website, you've asked it to have this functionality, and they've handed it to you, and you're like, great. Well, what you actually have in a situation like that are multiple users that all are going to have an experience there. So right now, I'm gonna disregard all the value journey of acquisition and just talk about the experience they have on the website.
Yeah.
So in the case of these people, you have the sales directors that are in the building who are probably taking phone calls from vendors. You have a sales team of, let's say, 8 to 12 data entry people who are taking phone calls. You also have a dealer, let's say a pizza restaurant, who needs to place orders and might not want to call. They're savvy enough to go to the website. And then you have the drivers, and the drivers have the capability. They're the most touch point you have because they actually see oftentimes the person who bought and or can walk upstairs and talk to them. They have the potential for taking money and payments. They have the potential to place orders. They have the potential to have a conversation and say, hey, we just got these great tomatoes from Italy. Maybe you should use these instead of those. And if you take into account all of those people, you would build a very different website. So each one has a user experience that's different. And for instance, the sales director probably doesn't need to have access to place orders. But if I own a pizza restaurant, I might be ordering, give or take seasonal fluctuations. I might have the same order delivered every Tuesday and Friday and modify it a little bit based on, maybe there is a football game at the high school football game 3 blocks away on Thursday, so I need to add some stuff. So from that perspective, I should be able to go in, log in really quickly, see my orders, click duplicate, make some modifications, and place an order, and I should be able to do it in less than a minute. And I shouldn't have to call somebody to talk about it and then go down the list of stuff with a piece of paper and a yellow notepad. There are those people, and that's what the phone is for. But your job is to convert everybody to be their own best data entry person and to certify their own entries by hitting post. And each one of those people has a different experience. So we actually have built that for industrial manufacturers and found out that all the people who make food in the Pacific Northwest that are like under 70 million love this tool because they're all those people I mentioned, the delivery people, inside sales reps, outside sales reps, sales teams, they all get to use it and it all works for them when they're logged in as a particular user type. So how's that for an answer?
Yeah, that's a great example. In fact, I'm actually going to build on that and come back to Lucas and going to ask his insight, what has been his experience. So let's say if I look at any of the UX researchers or the practitioners who really specialize in that space, they obviously focus on the behavior, the action, but they go much deeper. They go into psychology. They go into how users are going to behave, what they are going to think. In my experience, I think it's much deeper. It's not just mapping the actions. You really need to study at a much deeper level to be able to figure out how the experience is going to be. Lucas, so let's say if I ask you, what is the real difference between hiring a UX researcher to optimize your website, to optimize your customer journey versus the $400 guy, and I keep bringing the $400 guy. So why would they do much better job than a $400 guy?
Well, you can just roll out of bed and do better than the $400 guy. but really, and yeah, so I have really 3 things to focus on. Number 1 is, do they go deep? Do they ask why?
Yeah.
One of the best practitioners I know, Nick did. I can't remember his last name, but if anyone wants to, I'll put you in touch with Nick. But he's the one that introduced me to it. It's that 5 why methodology.
Yeah.
If you ask, well, why are you doing this? Well, why do you have the number on the banner? Well, customers like to call us. Well, why do they like to call you? And usually, if you ask why 5 times, you can get to the root cause of the problem. So, just how thorough are they? Do they just come in and say, "Oh yeah, we got it"? Like, you know your website and your customer journey better than anyone, whether you realize it or not. Are they pushing you to the point of frustration?
Yeah.
Like, you want someone who's pushing you and challenging you. And I'm a big believer in at least attempting to do it yourself, because that way at least you have something to base it off of, and you know for sure if you're hiring someone better than you. And if you're hiring someone better than you, then that's good. The $400 guy just probably won't be. No disrespect to the $400 guy, but it doesn't get you a lot. And then finally, just do your due diligence and find out what it was like working with them. Not even for the results, but did they deliver on time? Were they easy to work with? Were their files organized? You know what your weaknesses are. You know who you work with. Just make sure that you're aligning yourself with, in both, whether you're a merchant or a service provider. If you know your strengths and weaknesses as a service provider, if you know that maybe you're not the greatest at data collection, but if you're working with a client who's can give you the data very cleanly, they just don't know what to do with it, look for clients who match your core values and strengths as well.
So, Steve, I guess you have a comment there, right? So, I want to make sure that you are able to tell these stories. So basically what I am trying to get to is, okay, let's say if somebody does not know what user experience really is, okay, and why that matters. So let's say if you were to describe in the form of a story why user experience matters, can you describe it to them?
Well, user experience matters because if you don't have a good one, they'll leave. And if you do have a good one, they'll stay. And to build on Lucas's mentioning of the 5 whys, what you're going to get from someone who's experienced and isn't the $400 guy is that 5 whys. And I refer to that as hiring a company that has an MBWA, which is management by walking around. The people who build the best websites, who build the best user experiences, they actually go into your building, let's say pre-COVID, but hopefully we'll be doing this again, and talk to the people who are actually using it on the back end. And to Lucas's point, they also make the effort to talk to the customers who are using it on the front end. And if you actually engage your MBWA and you ask people, why are you doing that? What did you expect? All those things, you're going to get a different set of answers that helps you build not just a thing or a what, but you're going to build the response to Simon Sinek's concept of why. You're going to be a why company. And you want a website to answer the why for you, which is the emotional piece. And you're just not going to get that from someone who doesn't engage their MBWA and ask the 5 whys.
Yeah, so very interesting points there. So obviously, when we look at the customer journey map, there is going to be a formalized process. And I have heard this from a lot of different practitioners. They like to emphasize a lot more on the framework. But you both seem to be more on the practical side, where you are really going into the 5 whys and trying to figure out why you need to map this customer journey. But there are certain frameworks out there. I don't know if you have any specific recommendation in terms of, let's say, if you are trying to design these customer journeys, can I simply pick up from the website and can I simply map my customer journey without really going into those 5 whys? So, Lucas, let's say if I ask you for your recommendation, are there any template out there on the website that I can utilize to map these customer journeys? Or do you really need to go deeper and that the framework does not really matter overall?
Everyone's going to hate this answer, but it really does truly depend.
Okay.
Like, start with a template. Start with a framework that's already there. And if that gets the job done, and if that works, go back to the scientific method and stop for a little bit. See what the difference is and the delta. And once you've exhausted those out of those box solutions, and sometimes it's a gut call, then go into something more custom and bespoke. But always start with what's available, because if it's worked for somebody else, history is the greatest predictor of the future. Will likely work for you as well. And sometimes the changes can be very minute. They don't need to be that big, but maybe the reason they always call in on the phone is because $400 guy made a giant banner at the top of your page, it's like now you have to really scroll, and it's just easier to call in because that's the first click, not a shop now button. So start with something existing and then go to something a little bit more bespoke or custom built out. It also depends on the size of your company. I'm thinking for the typical e-commerce brand, but if you're $10 million of revenue plus, your needs are going to be a little bit different, or rather the combination of methodologies that come in.
So, Steve, what is your experience with respect to different templates, the methods? Do you have any recommendations in terms of any specific templates that really work versus the others that don't work?
Well, I definitely agree with Lucas. Find a template, try it, apply some scientific methodology to it. If I have a recommendation, the digitalmarketer.com folks have a value journey worksheet, and you might need someone to at least explain it to you. But I think it's available for free, and it's a good place to start. And it at least gets you thinking more about the entire journey and not just the funnel. So use that as a starting place, I think would be my recommendation.
Okay, so let's say if I am actually looking at that, and you said that, there's going to be a little bit of explaining required if I want to utilize that framework. So Steve, what are going to be some of the things that I am going to see there? Do you have any examples in terms of what I will not be able to understand? Let's say if I'm going there today and if I'm downloading.
Well, I think so I popped it up while we were talking. So I'm looking at I don't know if this is the most recent version, but they have eight boxes, and it's we think of a funnel as sort of a linear downward thing, lots of people, less people, and here's our customers. But there's another upside down funnel that sort of explodes out underneath it, and they sort of have more like this S-shaped idea, and they're incorporating awareness, which is like, how are you going to get people to become aware? How are you going to get them to be engaged? They included a little piece about subscription in case you have a subscription service. But they also have conversion. And in the middle of this box, after conversion is the word excite. And I think that would be confusing for people because they'd say, well, wait a second. Wasn't I supposed to get them excited when I got them engaged? And I think, well, yeah, the answer is yes. So the explanation is, well, actually, these are now customers who've already purchased. How do you get them excited enough about your brand to stick around? Right. And then they have an ascend ladder, which is a taller box. And the idea is you want them to go from being a customer to actually being an advocate, which is box number 7. Right. And in more confusion, there are 2 boxes. One is advocate and one is promote. And in my mind, I think, well, if I'm an advocate, I'm going to be promoting. So what's the difference? In my mind, I've told my own customers it's the same thing. I haven't had anybody tell me that they're different yet in a real way. So that's where some of the confusion might lie. But I also think that anybody who runs a business will benefit from looking at this, and of almost any size. And I'm also, in my experience, most of the $8 to $10 million companies that I come in contact with haven't done this, which I find surprising. I think if you're over 3 million and you haven't and don't spend at least once a year with your team looking at your customer value journey, then you're probably losing out on some market share, and you're probably losing out on some excitement for not just your customers, but for your employees, because there's a lot of places where they can be inspired to be successful, which is one of the things that actually makes people stick around. So having a good customer value journey isn't just about creating an experience for your customers. You're also building an efficient and successful team on the inside because they have more clarity about who they're talking to, why they're talking to them, and where those people are going, right?
Yeah. So, okay, amazing insight and example. So guys, we are close to our time now. I'm pretty sure you guys probably have a meeting to go to. So the only thing I can take is the quick closing advice. Lucas, do you have any closing advice for our listeners today?
Yeah, you know what, just like know your customer journey as best you can yourself. It just will make it so much easier when working with a consultant or a service provider or anyone, and it'll be better for your customers as well. So just really, really start with that, and then figure out what you're looking to do. What are your goals of going through the customer journey? Is it to drive more sales? Is it to increase your lifetime value? Is it to set up your company, your brand for an acquisition? What is your goal? So know why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
and make an attempt to do it yourself.
Love it. Love the advice. Steve, what is your closing advice for our listeners?
Today, I'm going to say be fearless, apply the scientific method, and measure things, and be kind.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, guys. That's it for today. On that note, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Steve Rice, head over to .comjungle.com. It's DOTCOMJUNGLE.com. If you want to learn more about Lucas Walker, head over to rolledup.io. It's ROLLEDUP.io. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Howard Tiersky, who discusses the process of customer empathy, the importance of user experience research, and the approach of design thinking to improve the outcome of digital initiatives. Also, the interview with Jeff White, who discusses why it is so important to identify the ideal customer profile for your offerings to streamline your growth. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.